Hey there, everyone. It's Jody Sutter. It's Just Ask Jody Live. And today we are talking about agency positioning and its effect on business development. And before I bring my guest on, just a little bit about this topic. So I think that I am not alone as a agency growth consultant, a new business expert who will strongly state how important a good strategic positioning is for business development. And even though there are lots of people out there who will give you really smart arguments for that, a lot of agencies, while they may agree in theory, find it really difficult to either home in on that positioning that feels right, or to feel comfortable about eliminating some other options so they can really focus on what is most meaningful for them and for their clients. It's a tricky thing, which is why there are a lot of people like me who are constantly going on about how important agency positioning is. Sometimes I even reframe it to in more of an economic context. I work almost exclusively with small agencies, and you know what? The management in small agencies, you don't have a lot of extra time on your hands, and when you have a positioning that is overly broad, it doesn't serve you, because it just means you've got a much larger haystack to root through to find those needles. A sharper positioning means that you are not only going to be able to use your time more efficiently, but you actually might find that if you're really good at managing your perception, that clients will find you before you have to go looking for them. But sometimes a positioning, you are forced into looking at your agency positioning by an event that is maybe bigger than you. And in this case, my guest today, Zach Hyder, is the new owner of Hubbell Communications. And he's going to describe, there he is, hey, Zach, he's going to describe to us a little bit about the transition of what it's like to take an agency from founder owner into a new ownership structure, and talk about the process of repositioning, the opportunity that this transfer of ownership gave them to think about positioning and how it's affected new business. And so I'm going to let Zach introduce himself briefly, but I'll just let you guys know that I met Zach like 4 years ago-ish, before you were at Hubbell.
Oh yeah, it was pre-COVID, was it not?
Definitely pre-COVID.
Pre-COVID. So that's easy 4 or 5 years ago.
And Marcel, he's lovely to see two of his favorite people. Thank you, Marcel. But yeah, so and Zach and I were both I'm still a agency growth consultant, and so is Zach. And I got this call or email out of the blue by some dude in the Pacific Northwest who just wanted to compare notes. I'm like, who is this guy? And I'm so grateful for that call, because you have become a good professional friend, and I really appreciate my relationship with you. But now, of course, you've gone from doing what I do to being the owner of an agency. And I want to make sure we get to business development issues, but maybe if you could just give us a little bit of the history and how you ended up in the position you are in today.
Yeah, happy to. And one correction at the top here, Jody, just for the audience. So I am not the owner of Hubbell. We are in. So this will be a good opportunity for us to talk about positioning while transitioning. So Hubbell is still an agency in transition. We are, working very diligently to kind of figure out what the post-founder ownership will look like. But that's still part of the process, and we can talk a little bit about that today. So the journey to how I ended up here is interesting. So yes, I was a you
Yeah.
not too long ago, and was very fortunate to get to work with a lot of agencies of different sizes, some big, some small, some mid-size. And, I formed a just really close and fast friendship with Ward Hubbell, who is the founder of Hubbell Communications. And, he was trying to figure out his succession plan. Really, I think we initially started just talking about how do I grow the business? How do I run the business? And it turned into a little bit more of kind of business advising more than growth coaching. And part of that, I think, was just he and I had a very easy connection and friendship, and he trusted me, and I really admired and respected what he was trying to do. And he was in a position that I think a lot of founders find themselves in. Is this company worth anything? Can it be without me at the helm? Right. something that happens to a lot of people that, initially, start an agency in their kitchen with a laptop, and then they look up 20 years later and they're like, oh my gosh, it's the thing, but can't do this without me. And so we just started working on sort of what his options were. And I always sort of tell this story as it's not the world's best example, but, I'm sort of Dick Cheney, meaning people don't know that Dick Cheney he was hired to find a VP for George W. Bush.
And you know what? I don't think I realized that. I don't think I knew that.
People don't know that. So I was hired to help Ward, figure out his transition plan, figure out his succession planning.
Yeah.
And we mapped out lots of different options. And, he just kind of kept saying, well, this is really great work, Zach. Thank you for your, diligence and thought. But, I think the person that should do it is you. And I was like, well, no, I already have a job. I'm good. And it just kept coming up. And I think part of it was when I became an agency coach years ago, Jody, coaching is what I love to do. The business of this business is what I love.
Yeah.
Running an agency is hard. We can talk a little bit about that. But, this was just something that I thought, okay, if I'm going to do this one last time before I officially, cash in my card.
Because before you were an agency consultant, you had a long history working at agencies before that too.
Yes.
Just to make that
I'm an agency guy. Have been since, I had my first job out of college. I worked in television news, hated it, was not my thing. And very quickly found myself in the agency world and loved it. So I am an agency creature. This was just the right agency with the right founder at the right time.
Yeah.
We can talk a little bit about what happened since I said yes, as we go through this.
Yeah. Yeah. And so, gosh, there are so many things that we could talk about. But one of the things that I think you came up against is as you were transitioning from Ward to a new ownership structure, the question I assume came up was, how do we continue to talk about ourselves the way we've always talked about ourselves? And if not, how does that change? How much does that change? And what do we do to get there? So would you tell us a little bit about that process and maybe when you realized we really need to spend some time refashioning or thinking about what our positioning is going to be going forward?
Yeah. And I think this is where Ward and I are very, I always tell people that he and I are the most similarly dissimilar people. I think we kind of think a lot alike in terms of our goals and interests, and but how we execute is very different. And Ward will be the first to tell you that, Ward he's an incredible businessman, and he is very good at putting things together and making deals happen. And he grew the agency around sort of those natural talents for him. He's a starter, and he will tell you, I'm great at starting things.
Yeah.
I'm just not, I don't love the running of it. I don't like the scaling and the building. And that's where I'm different is, I love finding, I think this, Jody, but like on the side, I renovate houses. Yeah. I'm a great house renovator, but I am not a developer in the sense of like, I'm going to, pour a new foundation and build from the ground up. But I like finding things that are just gems, that just need a little bit of love and attention, need a new owner, right?
Yeah.
That just is kind of where my strength is.
And also the process to get there, like we're here today and here's what we need to do to get to that final product.
Yeah. And I mean, I'm very good at looking at something that has great potential, that has been well taken care of, that's been, but somebody who's just decided, hey, this is no longer something that I want to continue to put energy into. But I have a lot, like many homeowners, I don't know why we're going down the home renovation analogy right now.
It can't be a useful analogy.
But, you have a lot of pride in that as somebody who's, bought homes from people, that's where they raise their kids. That's where they, they brought their baby home from the hospital to that house. They may have gotten married in that house. It means a lot to them, even though they have kind of outgrown it and are at a new phase in their life. And I love coming in and saying, wow, this is such a great place, and I just want to continue to make it better and, pass it on for future generations. So
yeah, because also to continue with the housing analogy, whether it's good or not, I think it's pretty good.
this is
You're also
a real estate podcast, a real estate webinar.
Right. I know we're going to get people coming in saying, "Oh, asking us questions about like flipping houses." But as the owner or the occupier of the house, you both things start to drive you crazy about it. And yet you also are too close to see some of the things that really need to, like maybe a little like some of the dinginess of the paint because you love that room. And so you're not seeing the things that should change. And yet you're also seeing the things that you're getting impatient with. And so sometimes I think this is where you and I are similar with as consultants, is to come in. I say, yeah, I always recognize the hidden gems. I see what needs to be brought out and polished. And that's what's so exciting. So what did you see at Hubbell? If I can put you on the spot for a moment.
What did I see as far as the opportunity?
Yeah, like in terms of moving Hubbell, moving the positioning.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, it's funny. As somebody that works with a lot of organizations, clients on their own brand positioning with their own, what's your story and what's your identity. The thing that I always tell clients is the same thing that I sort of saw at Hubbell, which is this identity, this brand already exists. You just haven't cleared away the mess in order to really elevate it. And I remember seeing a document, I asked Ward and the staff, I'm like, so help me understand, like, what's the brand of Hubbell? And they didn't really have one, but they did have this diagram of like some things that were really important to them. And I'm going to forget that. The one that stood out to me was the thing in the center, which was better communities. And the way it was so funny, because I asked Ward, I was like, can you explain the better communities thing to me? And the second he did, I was like, that's it. We need to be shouting that, not burying it in a document or a PowerPoint that, sits on a hard drive somewhere. And so really what it was is it's like this idea that a lot of what Hubbell does. So we kind of sit at the intersection of, public affairs, marketing, communications, public relations, creative, right? But a core, component of what we do is really around these big, complex, some would say political. I don't like that word. I don't think you're a political firm, but certainly public policy debates. So climate policy, access to education, healthcare affordability, land use planning and housing, renewable energy development. Like these big intractable problems that require business and community and policy and media to all come together to kind of figure out these solutions. And at the core of that is we're just trying to make things better for more people. And I love it. Loved that, right? So it's one of the reasons we started a podcast during COVID and called it the Better Communities Podcast. And Jody, we don't go on and say, here's the best way to write a press release, or, here's all the things you should be doing to optimize your message. Tons of that out there. Nobody really cares to hear more of that. But really, it's to talk about those things. So we've got a bridge here in Portland. We just did an episode about, we can't get it built. It's 100 billion years old. It's falling down. Everybody knows it's going to give pretty soon. And yet we're standing around debating, whether or not we should get a new bridge. And we're like, why does that happen? How come we can't solve some of these big critical problems? Because we all know it's going to make the community better if we just replace the bridge. So that was a big component of our positioning discussion, and is really where I sort of centered a lot of our who we are, what we stand for. Yeah.
One of the things I also really like about Better Communities is that I think it both, and I know it comes from a real place of authenticity, but it also, fortunately, I suppose, aligns well with this very popular, maybe overly popular notion of purpose-driven brands, purpose-driven missions of agencies, and so you've managed to avoid both of those words, which is great because there are way too many. It's no longer differentiation, people, by the way, being purpose-driven. Right. I think that's where I was going. I think that's really great. But I have a question, so I'm just going to jump around a little bit. because one of the things that I do with my clients is once we figure out, and I think there are a few components that are really important to the underlying foundation of business development strategy. One is your positioning, and another really important component is the team. Like who are the people there? Like you mentioned, Ward is a deal maker, and that, I don't know if that's how he led his business development strategy, but it probably was. Hopefully he said, that's what I'm really good at. So my number one approach is to create connections and build the agency from there. And you're probably good at that, but we're not all good at that. We have other strengths. And so something like thought leadership, like a podcast, might be a great way to get an agency owner, an agency leader out there promoting the agency. But sometimes what we'll also find is that agency leaders will say, great, let's do a podcast. And then the podcast will be really generous with information, but there's not actually a link back to, well, here's what we do and here's why you should hire us. So I thought it was interesting because you're not being overly obvious, like, hey, come to us because we'll position you better. But I'd be interested in knowing, and I know your podcast isn't, well, I guess it's a few years old now, but I'd be interested in knowing how you use it for business development. And is that important yet? Maybe that's, I don't know, maybe that's a year, 2 or 3 strategy.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's interesting, Jody, because I always say that there's a reason it's called business development, right?
Yeah.
The effort and the energy is in the development, and it's hard. It takes a lot of time. Ward and I are, we're both, I think, good business development people. We just develop business very differently.
And that's totally okay.
Ward is an old school networker, and he is brilliant at it. He is just in the mixed and in the middle of the right rooms with the right people. He knows who to know, and he knows them. And he also just has this incredibly magnetic way of, people just give him money. I don't know, they're like, I need to call him. Like he's that guy. I am a little different in that I'm more of a convener. I like to pull people together and have conversations. So the podcast is a great example of that. The thought leadership work that we do through our voting rights initiative 2120 is another way. Serving on boards, right? I don't necessarily need to be the guy. And a lot of founders, this is, I think, something that a lot of founders do, right? I'm sure Ward will tell you, you don't have any choice, right? When it's just you, that's what you got. That's what you sell. Yeah. But, we're 20 years old now, and, we've got, a dozen or so people on the team, and that's just, it's different, right? Leading, growing, and running a business at scale is different. So a lot of what I think I'm always trying to do is position Hubbell, not Zach, but position Hubbell as a convener, right? Someone who's bringing people together,
building communities.
Yeah. Well, I was just up in Seattle last week. So you asked the question, how does it, ultimately lead to connections and development? I was up in Seattle last week. We're doing a podcast right now on just downtown Seattle's recovery and revitalization plan. A lot of West Coast, big metropolitan areas, Seattle, Portland, San Francisco, LA. Yeah. I mean, we are behind post-COVID. We're still struggling with crime, homelessness, lots of things. But that's just an opportunity to go talk to people that I don't know, right? To go meet people and sit down and have conversations. And people are so willing, Jody, if you're like, hey, talk to me about this problem that you care about. 9 times out of 10, they're like, absolutely. And they like to be part of those stories, and they like to be part of those conversations. So, Ward's great at getting in rooms his way. I'm good at getting in rooms my way, but you're in the room, right? That's
right. That's all that really matters. And I think when you, if you tried to be Ward, or if Ward said, no, you got to network more, you would be frustrated and you would avoid it at all costs. And here the other, which what? Does he do that?
Well, I mean, again, this is one of the things I love about our friendship is, I think Ward and I are both worriers, right? And I think we worry that, okay, we want to make sure that we're also control freaks, both of us. No, but like, yeah, I think he's like, hey, I go down to the Arlington Club and, meet people, and that's kind of what he knows. And I think sometimes when you don't see that, you think that maybe you're not doing what you need to be doing, but he's also been very good at recognizing, I see the way you're doing it. It's just different, right?
Yeah.
You're meeting a lot of the same people, you're building relationships, you're creating a network. I keep saying, that my job at the end of the day is just to create visibility and sustainability, right? Be as visible, be out there, be meeting people. But yeah, I mean, we just do things a little differently. And, sometimes you're like just wanting to make sure that this is what worked for me. And I want to make sure, it worked. So that's, I think, a pretty normal thing.
Totally. And I think, again, it's like that, what I sort of the three-legged stool. You've got the positioning, you've got what your team is good at, you and your leadership, and then the resources. What do we have time to do? What do we have the budget to do? You touched on something that I think is also very important, this idea of perception or a narrative. And, we have a responsibility to craft our own story. We have complete control over the story that we tell as a business or even as an individual. We have much less control over the narrative that goes out in the marketplace. We have some control, but it's a mistake to think that just because we tell a good story, that the narrative in the marketplace is going to be similar to that. And I think there's lots of places where things leak out in a communications way, like a proposal that doesn't support the positioning or a podcast that doesn't support the positioning. So I really love how you are building that narrative that I think just reinforces who you are and reinforces that to your ideal clients, probably like, yeah, we want to be a part of this. We want to be invited to this party. Would you agree?
Yeah. Well, and that's, I mean, so much of the positioning work, as you know, Jody, it's storytelling. And I think so when you're positioning while transitioning, it's also redefining what that story is. It's retelling a different story, or at least adjusting it. I think in our case, just refining it, right? Better communities existed. It just really was kind of buried underneath other things. And it's work, right? I mean, you just have to sort of tell yourself every day that, you're on the right path, you're doing the right thing, and it's going to attract the right clients. And there's periods, I'm not going to stand here and say that there haven't been periods where you kind of were like, oh my God, I know what I'm doing. But then all of a sudden click, things click into place. And one of the things that I think is also very good when you're telling the right story that connects with people, and you ask them, hey, why'd you call us or why'd you hire us? That's one of my favorite things to always ask your client, like, why'd you pick us? And when they say, you guys just kind of are the right sort of agency, your
personality, tone,
right?
Yeah.
I love that so much more than, well, we just really liked Zach, or we just really liked, or we knew Gina, so that's why we hired you. Okay, well then that doesn't, there's no real value in the work or the team or the brand.
Right.
It's a relationship, and those are important. But I think that's the difference is, I think Ward knows, Ward was building an agency around him, and I'm building an agency that I hope has more value because I am not in it one day. Right.
And if I could, because sometimes also this is an issue that I'll grapple with my clients. And again, my bias is, let's get some business in the door. Let's beef up your pipeline. Let's get you out there pitching. Let's get you winning more business. If that's something I probably need to solve. So sometimes also I will say to an agency owner, like, look, you have got the personality, you are the brand. And at least for the short term, my recommendation is often, let's make it about you. Because if you want the shortest path to a successful strategic business development operation, your internal resources is your personality. So let's use it. But I think there are also many agencies like Hubbell as well, where the leadership team, it's a much more for want of a better word, democratic. I don't want to imply that, it's either democratic or autocratic, but I think your democratic approach, it's who you are and it's what you're building the agency around. I think that's wonderful too.
Yeah.
Go ahead. Sorry. I have another question.
I was going to say, it's the difference between a founder and a successor. Founders, one, they're different types of entrepreneurs. Successors are different types of entrepreneurs. And I think founders, there is a founder mentality. And you do. It is the easiest path. And yet it's also where I think a lot of, people who started agencies in their kitchens, 25 years ago, look up and they realize, oh man, I'm the dog that caught the car and now I don't really know what to do with this.
Right.
And so again, it takes both. And I think that is the thing that Ward was very, I think, bold in recognizing. He's young. I mean, he's, early 60s. He recognized 5 years ago, hey, I need to start planning for this. A lot of people look up and they're 70, still, like, I'm the top dog. I run this place. And they're like, yeah, maybe I should start figuring this out. And usually by then the runway is pretty short.
That's a really great point.
He recognized early that he needed to make himself irrelevant to the day-to-day business. And it takes guts. It takes a lot of courage to say, look, I'm gonna replace myself and figure out a transition plan now instead of staying in the game.
Yes. We're coming up to the end of our 30 minutes together. And at the risk of asking a big question, for agencies that are either in a similar situation or just realizing that they need to go through the process of looking at their positioning and recrafting it, did you follow a particular process? And maybe you didn't realize you were following it at the time, but I'd love to hear a little bit more about that.
Oh gosh, Brady, I had a plan and a process all worked out. And let me tell you, it went to hell real quick. This is, again, I'm a planner. I am a strategist. I always joke that I'm a fire prevention specialist. Ward is not a planner. Ward is a fighter. He is like, when the fire breaks out, let's deal with it then. He's amazing at that. And the truth is, I think it took both mindsets for us to get through this. Sure. Yeah. I mean, I had a plan. I had a perfect roadmap in my head as to sort of, year 1, year 2, year 3. And what happened was, Ward and I came up with this plan and sort of signed our agreement 2 days before the COVID pandemic shut the world down.
Oh my God. That's right. Yes. FYI, everyone. Yeah. Basically, Zach fell into this position literally on the brink of the COVID-19.
My first staff meeting was the first virtual meeting, one, I think that I'd certainly ever led. And two, I ran this company for a full year in lockdown. I mean, hard, very hard. We had a lot of stuff thrown at us that required us to adapt and change. But stuff that we still do today. I mean, the podcast really happened as a way for us to stay visible at a time when everybody was invisible and certainly had their head down dealing with their own problems. But no, I think have a roadmap. If I'm being asked to impart any advice, have a roadmap, but don't be so locked into it that you don't allow yourself to just continuously adapt and solve the problems that you're dealing with in real time. Ward has a saying, Ward and I have had, many conversations, just, sitting down, kind of staring at each other like, what next? But Ward, he always tells me, he goes, Zach, let me tell you something. As someone with more trips around the sun than you, he always said that. He goes, it's always something. And that's good advice. It's true, right? When you dig yourself out of one hole, right? There's going to be this other thing.
What do the Buddhists say? Life is suffering. It's like, well, I think it's slightly different, but it's in a weird way, in a perverse way. Once you know that, you're like, okay, well now it's going to be easier to deal with it because I know that there'll always be something, and yet we're also always moving forward.
Well, and that, I feel like this whole podcast has become an ode to Ward Hubbell. I'll have to send this to him. But honestly, he also says, and has given good advice. He goes, the only way you can fail, Zach, is if you quit. And the truth is, resilience has been a huge part of our story these last 3 years, as I think it has been for many small agencies that have been trying to navigate a global pandemic and the political turmoil of the last few years.
Fears of a recession. In a lot of ways, I feel more of my clients are actually having a worse year this year than they did in 2020.
That's exactly what we're dealing with now. And so I think for a while, I kept thinking, oh gosh, if we can just get this one thing behind us, it'll all be fine. Oh, if we can just get this other thing behind us, it'll all be fine. And no, that's when Ward said, Zach, it's always something. It's never going to be exactly where you want it to be. And now we're looking at sort of the international, financial question right now, just like everybody is. But, you can only fail if you quit. And we ain't quitting.
That's great. Is there anything, I don't know if anyone else out there listens to the 10% Happier podcast, a little shout out to Dan Harris. And I'm going to start adopting one of the things that he does at the end of this podcast. Is there anything I should have asked you that I didn't before we finish?
Well, maybe as an ode to Dan Harris, you could ask what makes you happy? Because
what makes you happy, Zach?
He's about happiness. Well, so I will tell you this. So I told you my first job was in TV news. So I worked at ABC News with Dan Harris.
Oh, that's so funny.
Although it was the
I'm gonna have to tag him on this podcast, on this LinkedIn Live.
Hi, Dan. It was the pre-mindfulness Dan. So he was an uptight, very intense, hard charging, and now he's
he will admit himself.
He will admit himself. But no, I mean, what makes me happy? Well, one, friendships like yours make me very happy. Friendships like the friendship I have with Ward. No, what makes me happy is like, just from a professional perspective, is like just looking at the work we do and going, man, we're making an impact. And I love when people are like, just enjoy seeing the stuff that we're, participating in out there in the world. And it could be, the work we do on, boards. It could be a billboard that, I'm such a dork. I still get excited when I see our billboards or our TV spots. I don't blame you. I would too. Yeah, I do. I can't help it. I'm like, oh my gosh, we did that. That always makes me happy. But no, I love being able to talk to good friends like you, Jody, and learn from good friends like you, as I always have. So many great people to learn from. And thank you for saying you learned from me. I learn a lot from you too, for sure. Zach, I might have to bring you back on, like, I don't know, next year or a couple of years. Hopefully all this will last that long, to hear how the positioning is going. I'd love to do a part 2 sometime in the future. Are you willing to do that? Oh, absolutely. You on the spot there. Okay, cool. It's a journey. It's a journey. Happy to do a check-in. And for anyone, again, I'm going to put you on the spot a little bit. For people who are interacting with us now, or listening, or watching this later, may they connect with you on LinkedIn, whether they are a potential client or even an agency owner who would love to get your advice? Of course, I will. Okay. I will just say, tell me a little bit about you when you reach out. One of my policies is I try not to accept random. Yes, me too. Connections, but someone who says, "Hey, I saw the LinkedIn live cast with Jody," and always love meeting new people, making new friends. And Zach also is very active on LinkedIn. He's got a great LinkedIn stream too that you'll be both learn from and be entertained by. And occasionally you see some of those houses that he renovates. Occasionally, yeah. When I'm really frustrated and can't figure out a problem, I have a tendency to post. So. Thank you, Jody. This was great. I mean, truly, this is fun stuff to talk about. It's like therapy for me. Oof, so I feel like I should probably pay you. So I was going to show you the bills in the mail. No, it's my pleasure too. This is really fun for me also. And